What if the world's greatest lost city wasn't real at all? What if it was a political warning hidden in plain sight? In this series, we uncover the hidden stories behind the world's biggest mysteries. And this is the story of Atlantis, Part 1, Truth, Myth, or Manipulation. Welcome to my channel. Let's start at the beginning. Where do we learn of this great lost kingdom and how does it begin? So far as we know, Plato is our only first-hand source for the story of Atlantis. But before we hear his tale, we need to understand that Plato wrote in the form of philosophical dialogue. His stories are embedded in conversations between characters. Not like a modern history book, where one guy tells you what happened. Plato's work is designed to be discussed and debated. So as we read or hear Plato's version of events, he's wanting us to talk back, to challenge, to consider another point of view. This is important because Plato's famous story of Atlantis comes from two of his dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, which together make up about 20 of Plato's collected work. They date to around 360 BC. That means there's no surviving ancient accounts outside of Plato's work. Okay, so Plato. In the dialogue we meet an Athenian named Critias, who launches into a sweeping history lesson, specifically about Athens' rise to power, which apparently began about 11,000 years before his conversation with the other characters. But it was about 9,000 years before that when the land of Atlantis became a problem for the Greeks. See, Atlantis was a naval superpower. Its military consisted of 180 ships and 1,800 pairs of brothers who served together, making it a force of elite twin warriors. They even had war elephants. Now, the Atlanteans were powerful enough to conquer most of the known world, but Athens was their biggest target. For 10 long years, Athens resisted, but eventually the Atlanteans broke through their walls.
Ow.
It was only thanks to an earthquake that cut the Atlanteans' fleet off from the coast of Athens that the Athenians survived. The Atlanteans, though, well, they ended up destroying themselves through hubris, intemperance, and love of luxury. Then Poseidon, god of the sea, punished them by sinking their land into the ocean. Their existence erased, their navy wiped out. Only a few escaped and sailed away, leaving Atlantis as nothing more than a watery grave. So now that we have Plato's story, let's get to the good stuff. Was Atlantis real or not? Scholars have been arguing about this for centuries. In fact, just a couple of years ago, an archaeologist claimed to have located it off the coast of Spain. However, the vast majority of scholars think that Atlantis was never real. Instead, it was a moral and political allegory. Think about it. Atlantis is described as extremely wealthy and powerful until their hubris leads them to attack Athens, which happens to be Plato's home city. Could it be that Plato wanted to send a message to his fellow Athenians? Maybe. Scholars point out that Atlantis' rise and fall mirrors Athenian history. Like Athens, Atlantis starts out as a small city, then grows to become a democratic naval powerhouse. And just like Athens, its wealth and power lead to moral decay, which ultimately results in their downfall. In fact, in the text, Critias says that Atlantis was like a big brother to Athens, guiding them toward democracy. So it seems pretty clear that Atlantis was meant to stand in for Athens and warn them about what could happen if they gave in to greed, power, and pride. But if Atlantis is an allegory, who or what inspired it? Well, that's a harder question to answer. Scholars have put forward many possible candidates. Some people argue that Atlantis was inspired by the Minoan civilization on the Greek island of Santorini, formerly called Thera. About 3,600 years ago, Santorini experienced a volcanic eruption that devastated the island and likely damaged, or destroyed many settlements across the Aegean Sea. One such settlement was Helic, a Greek city in Euboea, an island north of Athens. Legend says that half of the city was swallowed by the earth in a single day. Archaeologists believe an earthquake and tsunami may have caused widespread destruction around 2700 BC, and some historians suggest that this event could have inspired Plato's Atlantis story. But unfortunately, none of these candidates offer a perfect match to Plato's description of Atlantis. And without definitive archaeological evidence, this debate will continue. One thing's for sure, though, the idea of a great flood wiping out a powerful civilization stuck with people. And that brings us to part 2, how Atlantis became a symbol. Fast forward to the 1500s, and suddenly everyone's obsessed with Atlantis again. Italian polymath and writer of the Renaissance, it was believed that Atlantis existed, but had sunk beneath the waves. In the 1700s, Enlightenment thinkers began to share this belief. By the time the 19th century rolled around, Atlantis fever had taken hold. People began to imagine the lost city as a real place, a utopian paradise that sank beneath the waves. Writers like Ignatius Donnelly spun fantastical tales of Atlantis based on Plato's text. They drew connections between Atlantis and other cultures, including Native Americans and Welsh people, and claimed they were descendants of the Atlanteans. Soon, pulp novels and sensationalist magazines were full of wild Atlantis theories. But why all the excitement? Well, part of it was 19th century Romanticism. Everyone was in love with everything mystical and fantastical, but there was something else going on too. As historian A.G.H. Provincial puts it, Atlantis provided nationalists with the perfect fantasy, a pure race of people inhabiting a pure land. And that brings us to part 3, imperialist propaganda. The idea of a pure race inhabiting a pure land is a common theme throughout much of the racist and nationalist ideology of the 19th and 20th centuries. When pseudarchaeologist Charles Berlitz wrote The Lost Continent of Atlantis in 1974, he argued that the city was inhabited by an Aryan race of people. Berlitz's book was a bestseller, but its racial undertones put off some readers. In 1980, a writer named Michael Cremo published The Hidden History of the Atlantis, which presents Atlantis as a peaceful, enlightened society that mysteriously vanished. Cremo, who identifies as a yogi, claimed that the Atlantean people were spiritually advanced and traveled throughout the universe. Though Cremo's book is more New Age spirituality than Nazi Germany, the concept of a pure race of people still comes through. And this was the case with many later authors, too. Robert S. Belleville, for instance, wrote The Secret History of the Shions, which claims that the Atlanteans were actually a highly advanced alien species, which explains their sudden disappearance. But this isn't surprising if you look at the history of conspiracy theories. After all, they're often rooted in nationalism, racism, and sometimes anti-Semitism. And Atlantis was no exception. Author Ignatius Donnelly, for instance, claimed that Atlantis was home to an ancient Jewish conspiracy. Charles Berlitz, meanwhile, claimed that the Atlanteans were a master race. And pseudarchaeologist Graham Hancock frequently cites Atlantis in his books, which explore various New Age and paranormal themes. It should come as no surprise that some groups adopted Atlantis as their own. In the 1930s, a group of British occultists created the Atlantis Order, which merged mystical beliefs with Nazi ideology. During World War II, German propaganda films showed Atlantis as a mythical homeland for the German people. Today, neo-Nazi groups continue to claim Atlantis as part of their heritage, linking it to an ancient Germanic empire. But this brings us to the final part of the story, Part 5, Atlantis in Modern Culture. Today, Atlantis is still a popular fixture in fiction books, movies, and TV shows. And that's because the story of a lost civilization continues to fascinate us. But it's also because we like happy endings. In the Disney movie Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Milo Thatch discovers the lost city and helps its citizens escape before it's destroyed. Sure, it's a sweet message, but it also perpetuates harmful stereotypes about non-white people. They're exotic and mysterious, and most importantly, they vanish just as quickly as they appear. This is a harmful trope that goes back to early Hollywood movies like The Lost City of Z, which perpetuated racist stereotypes about uncivilized people in the Amazon. In recent years, there have been attempts to reclaim these stories and give them a darker spin. Movies like Aquaman, for instance, have tried to incorporate Atlantis into contemporary discussions about colonialism. But unfortunately, racist depictions of Atlantis still persist. So what can we take away from all this? Whether real or imagined, Atlantis tells us more about human hopes and fears than it does about any lost island. Historian Rebecca Spang puts it, Atlantis is a mirror in which we see ourselves. Whether we use it as a warning or a model depends on who we are. And that's the end of Part 3. So what myths today shape our politics and culture the same way Atlantis once did? Let us know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.